Hey everyone, I'm Andre,
I'm Andrew.
and we're from the Social Futures Lab at the University of Washington, and we're here to present our paper on agonistic image generation. So, at a high level, our objective in this paper is to build an image generation interface that engages and challenges user intentions for the kinds of images they want to generate, rather than only actualizing and reaffirming those intentions.
Starting quickly with some motivation for this project, we were really inspired by the quote-unquote woke Gemini controversy when in March of 2024, Google's Gemini model was criticized for producing overly diverse images of human subjects like founding fathers and Nazis. And so for us, this raised two questions. First, what is the goal of diversity here? Is there a consistent optimal standard for diversity? And second, how can image generation interfaces like Gemini be sites for sociopolitical engagement with these kinds of debates? While one intuitive and certainly common kind of explanation for this was just that we should do a better job of delineating between good and bad forms of diversity, we really wanted to push back against this in this work and caution that we should be careful about imposing singular and static standards for diversity onto image generation outputs. So for example, while some found diverse portrayals of founding fathers to be problematic, works like the Broadway play Hamilton show that portraying founding fathers in diverse but racially inaccurate ways could not necessarily be problematic, but instead be valuable forms of political discourse. More broadly, these types of debates are central to a philosophy called agonistic pluralism, which sees adversarial conflict as a healthy and inescapable part of democracy. And here, adversary is meant to imply a form of respect for someone whose ideas we struggle with, but whose right to defend those ideas we don't put into question. So inspired by the philosophy of agonistic pluralism, we asked this research question of how and why image generation interfaces mediate user reflection, particularly around topics of sociopolitical controversy. So to do so, we designed an agonistic image generation interface as Andre briefly described earlier, and then we test this interface along different metrics of user reflection in a lab study.
So, more about our methodology. We build our agonistic interface, and we also build two other interfaces that we compare against, as well as a baseline interface. And we evaluate all these interfaces in a lab study. We recruit 29 students to participate in 1-hour user studies. In each user study, the participant chooses a human subject of their interest to generate images of throughout the entire study. And their goal is to make a 10-image collage, which, in their view, best represents all aspects of the subject that they chose. And they began by creating the 10-image collage with a baseline interface, and then they iteratively modify that collage with the three other interfaces. And we'll kind of demo how this works with a sample walkthrough with the prompt Jesus, which is one of the prompts that our participants chose. So the baseline interface takes in a prompt and then outputs 4 images, your kind of standard image generation interface. And say that after several iterations of using this interface, the user selects 10 images that they think collectively do a good job of representing the various relevant aspects of Jesus. Then the next interface they might come across, we call the diverse interface. And this is modeled after the Gemini sort of controversy style interventions, where it looks like the baseline interface, except the user prompt is modified in the backend to include demographic diversity before images are generated. And you can see that visually. And suppose that the user then finds 3 images that they generate with this interface that they like or find relevant, and then add those into the collage. The next relevant interface is the reformulative interface. This is inspired by a lot of the prompt reformulation literature, which seeks to improve user experiences in image generation interfaces by suggesting prompt reformulations that add stylistic detail or other reformulations that are likely to improve user satisfaction with the images in the end. And so this interface suggests LLM-based reformulations of the prompt, and users can choose ones that they like and then create those images and then add them to the collage. Our proposed agonistic interface looks a lot like the reformulative interface, except instead of proposing this more standard LLM-based suggestions or reformulations of the prompts, we take the user's prompt and then do research to propose divergent and grounded interpretations from Wikipedia discourse.
Yeah, so going more into that on the back end, we start with the user prompt, and then we first generate 5 common mental images of the prompt using an LLM. We also search for 50 Wikipedia pages, and here we use Wikipedia because its public editing process is conducive to agonistic conflict, as others like Kate Crawford have argued. After filtering out the irrelevant pages, We then rank and select the top 20 most controversial pages using a really simple metric of just the number of edits per editor. And we do this to engage users with relevant ongoing political controversies, which is a core principle of our agonistic design methodology. After selecting a random subset of these controversial pages, we then generate an interpretation from each page that aims to contrast as much as possible with those pre-generated mental images from before. And we do this to confront users with unsettling content in hopes of challenging their assumptions, which is another principle of our agonistic design methodology. So in this example, the interface suggested an interpretation of Jesus based on a Wikipedia page about Islamic portrayals of the Second Coming to kind of contrast with typical Christian portrayals of Jesus. And note that after selecting an interpretation, the user can continue to modify and even write their own interpretation, which is done to respect users as adversaries by allowing them to engage with these conflicts on their own terms, which is the final principle of our agonistic design methodology. So in sum, the users interact with these three interfaces and the baseline interface in a random order and generate 4 iterations of their collage in total, which allows us to measure in a more nuanced way the unique rethinking that is generated from each paradigm of image generation interaction. Now, briefly moving into some result highlights. We find first that the agonistic interface, perhaps unsurprisingly, produces the most rethinking, and this is measured based on a self-report and survey question after the users interact with each interface. So participants report the most rethinking after using the agonistic interface. But more interestingly, we also find that the agonistic interface more effectively portrays diversity than the Gemini-style diverse interface itself. So participants are more likely to add images from the agonistic interface for diversity-related reasons than images from diverse, which just means that they're more likely to add images because they think those images represent some generally underrepresented but normatively important aspect of the prompt. And this was measured through a qualitative coding of interviews where we looked at what participants said when they were adding each image to the collage. So for a quick summary, the Gemini-style diverse interface was often seen as superficial and lacking in user control, whereas the reformulative interface was often seen as augmenting user control, and it provoked some rethinking, but not as much as the agonistic interface. However, the agonistic interface could also be frustrating and off-topic for users at times.
And we also have many other interesting results and walkthroughs of user experiences in the paper. But now just about 2 interesting implications of our paper. The intention is all you need paradigm describes a very common paradigm in CV and HCI work on image generation, in which the user's intentions are taken as the ground truth, and the goal of the system is to align itself towards those intentions. Sort of to challenge this, our work advocates for a vision of image generation interfaces which more meaningfully engage user intentions with the much broader social context that they're entering into without erasing those original intentions. And this allows for image generation interfaces to be not just a way to produce personal entertainment, but a medium for thinking really closely in a nuanced ways about visual politics, about the ways in which groups of people should and shouldn't be represented, and recognizing the contestation in those debates.
And finally, our work also has implications for how we think about diversity in image generation. We observe that mainstream views of diversity really see it as something that's only appropriate when it's applied in a neutral way or a strictly factual way. But we really want to challenge this in this work. We have a different explanation for why users reject superficial forms of diversity, like in Gemini, and that's not because those forms of diversity were unfactual, but rather because authentic diversity must be grounded in real human conflict. So for example, the reason why we care about diverse portrayals of CEOs and doctors and other occupations is because these representations do something. They challenge harmful stereotypes and subconscious biases. And similarly, works like Hamilton show that portraying founding fathers in diverse ways can be important for highlighting the role that people of color have played in American history. So by foregrounding these conflicts, agonistic interfaces can be sites of democratic engagement that give rise to new ways of seeing prompts. So really quickly to sum up, this just means that we should shift from seeing diversity as a neutral value to really prioritizing diversity that makes a difference. So thank you, and we look forward to fielding your questions.